My name is Leo. I'm 25 and I fix things for a living. Mostly wood. Sometimes pipes, sometimes wires, but my hands are happiest when they're shaping a piece of oak or smoothing the grain of a pine board. I live alone in the house my grandfather left me, a small salt box at the edge of a quiet neighborhood in Burlington, Vermont. It's a project, this house. The floors creak a language only I understand, and the windows rattle when the wind comes down off the lake. I'm slowly making it mine, one repaired joist, one stripped and restained door at a time. My life ran on a simple, predictable rhythm. Wake up with the sun, coffee, work, home, work on the house, sleep. I like the quiet. I preferred the company of my tools, the honest feedback of a level bubble, the clean bite of a sharp chisel. People were more complicated. Conversations felt like trying to assemble furniture with the instructions in another language. I had a few friends, mostly guys from job sites, and my cousin Dave, but I wasn't one for bars or parties. My past attempts at relationships had been short and awkward, like a badly cut dovetail joint. They looked okay from a distance, but up close, you could see they were never going to hold. I was competent with a hammer and saw, but clumsy with feelings. I knew how to build a sturdy wall, but I was less sure about building connections. It was easier to keep to myself, to find satisfaction in the solid, tangible results of my labor. A perfectly hung door, a bookshelf that sat square and true. These things made sense. They didn't change their minds or say one thing when they meant another. My emotional landscape was a lot like my house before I started working on it, structurally sound, but with a lot of unfinished rooms and drafty corners I tended to avoid. It was a Tuesday in October when the rhythm broke. My cousin Dave called me while I was planing a warped tabletop in my workshop. The sweet, sharp scent of cedar dust filled the air, a perfume I preferred to any cologne. Dave's voice came through the phone, too loud and cheerful, a stark contrast to the steady hum of my sander. He told me he'd set me up on a blind date. My first instinct was to say no, to make an excuse about a leaky pipe or a rushed job. The thought of sitting across from a stranger, trying to fill the silence with words that felt like sandpaper in my mouth, was exhausting. But Dave was persistent. He said her name was Eleanor, that she was a friend of his wife's colleague, and that I needed to get out of my dusty workshop and join the land of the living. He framed it as a personal favor. Just one coffee, he'd said. An hour, tops. If it was a disaster, he'd never ask again. I sighed, the sound lost in the whine of the machinery. I agreed, mostly to get him off the phone. It was just coffee. Not much of a deal. I could handle an hour of awkward silence. It was, after all, my native tongue. The place was called The Daily Grind, a cozy spot downtown with mismatched wooden chairs and the rich, dark smell of roasted coffee beans hanging in the air. Rain was starting to spit against the large picture window, blurring the streetlights into soft, hazy stars. I was 10 minutes early, a habit I couldn't shake. I found the table Dave had described, a small two-top in the back corner, and sat down, my rough hands feeling out of place on the polished surface of the table. I watched the door, running a mental checklist of polite questions to ask a person I'd never met. A few minutes later, a man walked in. He was tall, dressed in a suit that looked expensive and tight, and he scanned the room with an air of impatient authority. He spotted a woman sitting alone at a table near the front. She had her back to me, but I could see she had dark, intricate braids piled on top of her head and was wearing a soft, forest green sweater. She was reading a book. The man strode over to her table and said something I couldn't hear. She looked up, and I saw her face for the first time. She was beautiful, with high cheekbones and warm, intelligent eyes. She was also older than me, maybe late 30s. I assumed he was her date and tried to mind my own business, focusing on the swirling patterns in my black coffee. But his voice carried. It was sharp and condescending. He was gesturing emphatically, his movements jerky and annoyed. The woman, Eleanor I presumed, watched his lips with intense focus. She didn't speak, but her expression shifted from calm surprise to a quiet, deep-seated weariness. I couldn't hear all of his words, just snippets. Ridiculous waste of my time should have been mentioned. He threw his hands up in a gesture of finality, said something else that made her flinch almost imperceptibly, and then turned and stormed out of the coffee shop, the little bell on the door jangling angrily in his wake. She just sat there for a long moment, staring at the empty space where he had been. She looked down at her book, her fingers tracing the cover, but I could tell she wasn't seeing the words. The barista came over and asked if she was okay. She gave a small, tight nod and a sad smile, then picked up a small notepad and pen from her purse and began to write something down. It was then that I understood. The way she had watched his mouth, her silence, the notepad. She was deaf, and that arrogant man had just walked out on her because of it. My stomach twisted into a cold, angry knot. I sat there for another minute, my own date now officially late. I should have just left. It wasn't my business. But I couldn't shake the image of her face, the quiet dignity she held even as that man tried to strip it from her. I got up, my chair scraping against the wood floor, and walked over to her table. She looked up as my shadow fell over her eyes guarded. I cleared my throat, suddenly feeling like a teenager. I made sure she could see my face clearly and spoke slowly, maybe too slowly. "Excuse me, are you Eleanor?" She watched my lips, then gave a hesitant nod. A flicker of confusion crossed her features. I pointed back to my table in the corner. "My name is Leo. I think I was supposed to be your date." Her eyes widened in surprise. She looked from me to the empty chair across from her, then back to me, a question in her expression. I pulled out my phone and showed her the text from Dave. "Blind date. The daily grind. 7 p.m. Her name is Eleanor." A slow, wry smile touched her lips, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. She picked up her notepad and wrote, her handwriting a neat, elegant script. She turned it toward me. "Well, this is awkward. I was set up by my friend Sarah. His name was Mark." She gestured toward the door where the man in the suit had disappeared. "So we were two strangers, set up for two different blind dates at the same place, at the same time. A coincidence that felt more like a piece of badly written code." I pulled up the chair Mark had abandoned and sat down, feeling the need to fill the sudden, heavy space between us. "He's a jerk," I said, the words coming out blunter than I intended. Her smile became a little more genuine. She nodded in agreement, then wrote again. He was surprised. People often are. There was no self-pity in the words, just a statement of fact. It made my anger at him burn even hotter. "It's no excuse," I said. "It's just rude." I looked at her, at the intelligence in her eyes, the strength in the set of her jaw. She was watching me intently, her gaze making me feel seen in a way that was both unnerving and strangely comfortable. We sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the coffee shop, the hiss of the espresso machine, the low murmur of other conversations, filling the space around our quiet island. I didn't want to leave. The hour I had dreaded now felt like something I wanted to protect. "Since we're both here," I began, my voice a little unsteady. Would you want to have that coffee anyway?" She studied my face for a long moment, and I had the distinct feeling she was reading more than just my lips. She was gauging my intent, my sincerity. It was like she was checking a piece of wood for hidden knots or weaknesses before deciding to work with it. Finally, she gave a small, decisive nod. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it surprised me. We stayed for another hour. The conversation was slow, a careful construction we built together. I learned to speak clearly, to face her, to pause and give her time. She wrote on her notepad, and sometimes she spoke, her voice a little rough from disuse but clear and melodic. She was a book editor. She had moved to Burlington 6 months ago from New York City, seeking quiet. She loved old houses and the smell of rain on asphalt. I told her about my work, about my grandfather's house. I found myself talking more than I usually did, the words coming easier than they ever had before. There was a patience in her presence that drew them out. When we left, the rain had softened to a fine mist. We stood under the awning of the coffee shop, the air cool and damp against our skin. It turned out she lived only a few blocks from me, in the same neighborhood of old, character-filled homes. I offered to walk with her. As we walked, the silence between us wasn't awkward anymore. It was comfortable, companionable. Her house was a beautiful old Victorian, painted a pale, robin's egg blue, but it was in need of some care. The paint was peeling in places, and the front gate hung crookedly on one hinge, scraping a sad arc in the stone walkway every time it moved. I stopped in front of it, my professional instincts kicking in. "That hinge is shot," I said, pointing. "The wood around it is starting to rot. It's letting water in." She looked at the gate, then back at me, a small frown on her face. She typed a quick message on her phone and showed me the screen. "I know. The landlord is useless. It's been like that since I moved in. I looked at the broken gate, then at her. An idea formed, simple and clear. It was a way to see her again. A way to do something solid and useful, which was always easier for me than finding the right words. I could fix it for you, I offered. It wouldn't take long. I have the tools, and probably some scrap hardwood at the workshop that would match. She looked surprised, her eyebrows raising slightly. She typed again. You don't have to do that. I know, I said, meeting her gaze. It was the truest thing I'd said all night. Fixing that gate felt important. It felt like the beginning of something, like setting the first, crucial foundation stone for a structure you hoped would last. After a moment's hesitation, she smiled, a real, radiant smile this time, and nodded. I came by the next Saturday morning. The sky was a crisp, clear blue, and the autumn leaves were a riot of red and gold. I had a toolbox in one hand and a carefully selected piece of white oak in the other. The smell of sawdust and metal polish clung to my clothes. Eleanor met me at the door with 2 mugs of coffee, steam rising from them in the cool air. She was wearing a thick, oatmeal-colored cardigan, and her hair was tied back with a simple cloth band. She looked comfortable. She looked like home. She passed me a mug, her fingers brushing against mine. The coffee was dark and strong, just how I liked it. She motioned for me to follow her around to the back porch, where she had a small table and 2 chairs set up. She had her notepad with her. Thank you again for this, she wrote. You really don't have to. I took a sip of the coffee. It was warm and perfect. It's my pleasure, I said, and I meant it. I like fixing things. I set to work on the gate. The old iron hinge was rusted solid, the screws stripped. I had to carefully pry it off, taking care not to damage the surrounding wood of the fence post any further. Eleanor sat on her porch steps, reading her book, occasionally looking up to watch me. The air was filled with the sounds of my work. The scrape of the pry bar, the rhythmic rasp of a handsaw cutting away the rotted wood, the soft tap of a mallet seating the new piece of oak into place. It was a quiet, peaceful kind of companionship. We didn't need to talk. My actions spoke for me, a language of competence and care. Her presence was a silent encouragement. Every so often, she would get up and bring me a glass of water or just stand nearby, watching my hands as I worked. I was intensely aware of her gaze. It made me more deliberate, more precise in my movements. I wanted the repair to be perfect, not just functional, but seamless. A joint so tight you couldn't slip a piece of paper in it. When I was finished, the gate swung smoothly and silently on its new hinge, closing with a satisfying click. It was solid, secure. I stepped back to admire it, wiping a smear of wood glue from my thumb. Eleanor came over, a look of genuine appreciation on her face. She ran her hand over the new wood, feeling the smooth, sanded finish. She looked at me and mouthed the words, "Thank you." It was more than enough. As I was packing up my tools, she came out with a small, foil-wrapped plate. She handed it to me with a shy smile. Inside were 4 perfectly baked chocolate chip cookies, still warm from the oven. The smell was incredible. A fair trade, she had written on her notepad, which she'd tucked under the plate. I took a cookie. It was soft and gooey, the chocolate melted and rich. This is a great trade, I said, my mouth full. I think I got the better end of the deal. Her laugh was quiet, but it made her whole face light up. That first fix became a routine. The following weekend, I came back to look at a window that wouldn't close properly in her study. While I was easing the warped sash back into place, she brought me tea and pointed out the rows of books lining her walls. The shelves were sagging in the middle, bowing under the weight of hundreds of stories. That's not safe, I had said, running my hand along the bent particle board. One day that's all going to come down. Her eyes had widened with concern. Can you fix it? She wrote. A thrill went through me, the quiet excitement of a new project. A project for her. I can do better than fix it, I told her. I can build you new ones. From real wood. Something strong enough to hold all of this. Her face broke into that brilliant smile again, and I felt my heart do something that felt suspiciously like a misfired nail gun. So, I started building her bookshelves. I spent my evenings in my workshop, the scent of fresh-cut maple filling the small space. I designed them specifically for her study, with adjustable shelves and a small, carved detail on the top that mirrored the pattern on her home's gingerbread trim. It was a small touch, something she might not even notice, but I wanted them to belong in her space, to belong to her. During the days I spent installing them, we fell into an easy rhythm. I'd work, and she would be in the same room, editing manuscripts at her desk, the quiet scratch of her red pen on paper the only sound besides my tools. We didn't talk much, but the silence was full. It was full of mutual respect for each other's craft. We were both builders, in our own ways. She built stories from words, and I built structures from wood. Sometimes she would write me a note, asking about a certain tool or a type of wood. I would stop what I was doing and explain, showing her the grain, letting her feel the different textures. She was a quick learner, her eyes sharp and observant. She started learning the names of my tools, pointing to my chisel and mouthing the word, her pronunciation careful. In return, she would show me passages from the books she was working on, pointing out a particularly beautiful sentence or a clever turn of phrase. I was seeing pieces of her world, and she was seeing pieces of mine. We were building something, piece by piece, one nail and one word at a time. One rainy Saturday, after the bookshelves were finished and filled, I was helping her hang some pictures. We were in her living room, the gray light filtering through the windows, the sound of the downpour a steady drumbeat on the roof. I was on a small stepladder, trying to get a heavy, framed print level. A little to the left, she mouthed from across the room, her head tilted. I nudged it a fraction of an inch. She gave me a thumbs up. As I was stepping down, the front door burst open. The man from the coffee shop, Mark, stood there, dripping rainwater onto the hardwood floor. He was a storm that had just broken into her calm, quiet house. Eleanor froze, her back going rigid. I immediately stepped off the ladder and moved to stand slightly in front of her. Not aggressively, just a solid presence between them. "Eleanor, we need to talk," he said, his voice loud and booming, completely unsuited for the small, peaceful room. He didn't look at her when he spoke, but at the wall above her head, as if addressing the entire room. He hadn't changed at all. Arrogant. Controlling. "You can't just ignore my calls. My texts. That's childish." Eleanor held her ground, her expression unreadable. She just stared at him, her silence a more powerful rebuke than any shout could have been. He finally seemed to notice me. He gave me a dismissive once-over, his lip curling. "Who's this?" "The handyman." He said the word like it was an insult. I didn't react, just kept my eyes on Eleanor, my hands loose at my sides. Anger was a useless tool in this situation. My job was to be a wall. Solid. Unmoving. "I told you, Marcus, we are done," Eleanor said. Her voice was steady, each word carefully articulated. She had told me his name was Marcus, not Mark. He had been her ex-boyfriend from New York. The blind date had been a lie on his part, a trick to get her to meet him. The realization made me sick. He had engineered that whole humiliating scene. "Done," he scoffed. "You don't get to decide that. After everything I did for you." He took a step into the room, and I took a half step forward to meet it. He stopped. He wasn't used to being met with resistance. He was used to being the loudest person in the room, the one who took up all the space. My quiet presence seemed to unnerve him more than any threat would have. I looked at Eleanor, ignoring him completely. I made sure she could see my face. I didn't know much sign language yet, just a few words I'd been learning from a book, but I signed the one I had practiced the most. "Okay." Her eyes met mine, and for a second, the hard mask on her face softened. She gave me the tiniest of nods. It was all I needed. "You need to leave," I said to Marcus. My voice was low and even. No anger, no challenge. Just a simple statement of fact, like telling him a board was warped or a nail was bent. He glared at me, then back at Eleanor. He was looking for a crack, a weakness to exploit, but he found none. He found her, calm and resolute, and me, a quiet, unmovable object at her side. He sputtered for a moment, opened his mouth to say something else, then seemed to think better of it. With a final, disgusted look, he turned and stalked out, slamming the door behind him. The picture I had just hung rattled on its nail. The silence he left behind was immense. The only sound was the rain on the roof and the frantic, angry beat of my own heart. Eleanor stood completely still for a long time, her arms wrapped around herself. I didn't move, didn't speak. I just waited, letting her have the space she needed. Finally, she let out a long, shuddering breath and her shoulders slumped. The strength she had projected just moments before seemed to drain out of her. She walked over to the sofa and sank into it. I went to the kitchen and made her a cup of tea, my hands moving on autopilot. When I brought it to her, she was just staring at the rain-streaked window. I set the mug on the coaster on the end table. She looked at me, her eyes glistening. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "For staying. Always," I said, and the word felt more real, more solid than any piece of what I had ever worked with. I sat down in the armchair across from her, giving her space but letting her know I wasn't going anywhere. She picked up her notepad, her hands trembling slightly as she wrote. "He was like that all the time," the note said. "He hated my silence. He said it was a weapon I used against him. He always tried to fill it with his own noise." I read the words, and my heart ached for her, for the loneliness she must have felt, even in a relationship. To be with someone who saw a fundamental part of who you were as a flaw, as an attack. I thought about our quiet companionship over the last few weeks, the comfortable silences filled with the sounds of work and shared existence. Our silence wasn't a weapon, it was a sanctuary. She told me more, writing it down page after page. He was a lawyer, charismatic and successful on the surface, but deeply controlling. He had tried to manage every aspect of her life, from her friends to her career, insisting he knew what was best for her. Moving to Burlington had been her escape, her declaration of independence. But he refused to let go. His reappearance had been a violation of the safe, quiet world she had so carefully built for herself. Her vulnerability was a fragile thing, and I felt an overwhelming urge to protect it, to build a fortress around her so no one like Marcus could ever touch her again. But I knew that wasn't what she needed. She didn't need a savior. She had saved herself. She just needed someone to stand with her, to guard the perimeter while she healed. She needed a partner, not a rescuer. We sat there for a long time as the afternoon faded into a dusky, rain-soaked evening. We didn't talk much more. She drank her tea, and I just sat, a quiet sentinel. When she finally looked up, some of the color had returned to her face. The storm inside her seemed to have passed. She gave me a small, tired smile. "Thank you for being quiet with me," she wrote. I just nodded. I understood. That evening marked a shift. The line between my house and her house began to blur. Before, I would pack up my tools at the end of the day and go home. Now, more often than not, I stayed. We would make dinner together, a clumsy but comfortable dance in her small kitchen. She would chop vegetables, and I would handle the hot pans on the stove. We learned each other's rhythms without words. One night, after a simple meal of pasta and salad, we were sitting on her porch. The rain had finally stopped, and the air was clean and cool, smelling of wet earth and pine. The moon was a pale sliver behind a thin veil of clouds. It was one of those quiet, intimate moments where the world seems to shrink to include just the two of you. I had been thinking all day about what she had told me about Marcus, about his cruelty. I looked over at her profile outlined in the soft porch light. "That guy," I started, my voice feeling rough in the quiet air. "He doesn't get it." She turned to look at me, her expression questioning. "What you have?" I struggled to find the right words, the ones that wouldn't sound clumsy or hollow. "You're quiet. Your way of seeing things, it's not a flaw. It's a strength." I took a breath, feeling my own vulnerability now. This was harder than any piece of joinery. He was trying to fit a square peg into a round hole and blaming the peg. You deserve a love as unique as you are. Someone who learns your language, not someone who demands you speak theirs. The words hung in the air between us, simple and honest. I had finally said it. A quiet confession. Eleanor stared at me, her dark eyes searching my face. I could see the emotions warring there, surprise, hope, and a deep, ingrained caution. She reached out and placed her hand on my arm. Her touch was light, but it sent a current through me, warm and grounding. She didn't write anything. She just looked at me, and in her eyes, I saw the question she was afraid to ask aloud. "Do you mean you?" And in that moment, I realized the full truth of my own feelings. All the fixing and building, all the time I had spent in her quiet company, it wasn't just neighborly kindness. I hadn't just been fixing her house. I had been building a space for myself in her life. I was in love with her. The realization was as sudden and solid as a hammer hitting a nail head. I had been blind to it, focusing on the work in front of me, but it had been there all along, the foundation I was building on without even knowing it. I covered her hand with my own and nodded slowly. Yes, I said. I mean me. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but she was smiling. A real, trembling, beautiful smile. She leaned in, and I met her halfway. The kiss was soft, tentative at first, a question and an answer all at once. It wasn't like the movies. There was no sudden swell of music. There was only the gentle press of her lips, the faint scent of her tea, and the cool night air around us. It was real. It was a choice. It was the surest, most solid thing I had ever built. The old, rickety fence that separated our backyards had always bothered me. It was a physical manifestation of the distance that no longer existed between us. The paint was peeling, and several of the slats were broken. It served no purpose other than to say, "This is mine, and that is yours." But our lives weren't like that anymore. His and hers were becoming ours. My tools were now neatly organized in her garden shed. A stack of her books had taken up permanent residence on my nightstand. One Saturday, I woke up with a clear purpose. I found Eleanor in her garden, tending to her tomato plants. The morning sun was warm on our backs. I walked over to the fence and placed my hand on the weathered wood. "I'm taking this down," I said. She looked up from her weeding, a question in her eyes. "There's no need for it anymore," I explained. She looked at the fence, then back at me, and a slow, beautiful understanding dawned on her face. She nodded, her smile as bright as the morning. It took me most of the day. I dismantled it carefully, board by board, stacking the usable wood to one side. It felt symbolic, like I was tearing down the last remaining barrier between us. With each rotten slat I pulled free, I felt like I was removing an old fear, an old hesitation. When I was done, the 2 yards flowed into one. The space felt open, endless. It felt like a promise. We fell into a new kind of domesticity, a life woven together from 2 separate threads. We cooked most of our meals together. We read in the evenings, sitting in comfortable silence in the living room, my dog, Buster, asleep at our feet. We took walks in the evenings, her hand tucked into mine. Her presence smoothed out the rough edges of my solitary life. My quiet wasn't lonely anymore. It was peaceful, because it was shared. I continued learning sign language. I was slow and clumsy at first, my big, calloused hands struggling to form the delicate shapes. But Eleanor was a patient teacher. She would guide my fingers, her touch gentle, her smile encouraging. Every new word I learned felt like a gift I could give her. Good morning. Beautiful. I love you. These were the important things, the load-bearing beams of our new life. Our communication became a unique blend of everything. Spoken words, for which she would watch my lips. Signs, which became more and more fluid between us. Written notes for complex thoughts. And a whole silent language of gestures, glances, and touches that was entirely our own. I learned the specific way she tilted her head when she was curious, the small frown that meant a sentence in a book displeased her, the way her eyes lit up when she tasted something delicious. She learned the set of my shoulders that meant I was tired, the way I tapped my fingers when I was thinking through a problem, the quiet satisfaction on my face after a good day's work. We had built our own language, as unique as we were. 6 months passed. The last of the fence wood had been used to build a raised garden bed that now sat squarely on the property line, belonging to both of us. It was late spring, and the garden was thriving. We had planted tomatoes, peppers, and rows of herbs that scented the air with basil and thyme. Eleanor had added flowers, bright, cheerful zinnias and tall, elegant delphiniums. It was our shared project, a living symbol of the life we were growing together. One warm evening, we were sitting on the porch swing I had built, the one that now hung where her broken front gate used to be. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was soft, and the neighborhood was quiet. Eleanor leaned her head on my shoulder, and I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her close. We sat like that for a long time, just watching the day end. She lifted her head and looked at me, her expression soft and full of a peaceful contentment that I felt reflected in my own chest. She signed, her movements slow and deliberate in the fading light. "This is good." I smiled and signed back, my own movements still a little less graceful than hers, but clear and certain. "It is very good." She reached up and touched my face, her thumb gently tracing my jaw. "Love is this," she said, her voice a soft murmur that was almost part of the evening air. It's not the big, loud declarations. It's not the grand gestures. She looked out at our connected yards, at the garden we had planted together. It's the quiet. It's staying when you don't have to. It's building something together every day. I leaned down and kissed her. It was a kiss full of gratitude and a deep, quiet certainty. It tasted of sunshine and contentment and the promise of 1,000 more evenings just like this one. When I pulled back, I looked into her eyes, the eyes that had seen so much unkindness and still held so much warmth. "I love you," I said, and I signed the words as well, wanting her to see them and feel them in every way possible. She smiled, her whole being radiant with it. She didn't need to say it back. I could see it in her eyes. I could feel it in the way her hand rested in mine. Our love was a house we had built together. It was quiet and strong, with a solid foundation and a roof that would keep out any storm. It was home.